Humanity is obsessed with dinosaurs. If you ask a random person on the street to name an extinct animal, 9 times out of 10 they will say, dinosaur. They live on our t-shirts, in our children's bedrooms, on movie screens, and in our nightmares. The Tyrannosaurus rex is a cultural icon, recognizable as easily as the Mona Lisa's smile or the Coca-Cola logo. But why do these lizards, which vanished millions of years before the first human walked the earth, occupy such a massive place in our imagination? Perhaps it is the scale. Dinosaurs are the embodiment of absolute dominance. They ruled the planet for a period hundreds of times longer than the entire history of humanity. They reached sizes that biology seems should not allow. They were evolutionary experiments of such audacity that the modern natural world looks modest and conservative by comparison. But perhaps the main reason for our love is that they make us feel small. In a world where we are used to considering ourselves the pinnacle of evolution and the top of the food chain, dinosaurs remind us that Earth belonged to someone else once. And one day, it might pass to other, more terrifying masters. However, behind the images of Hollywood monsters lies a much more complex and interesting reality. Pop culture often lies to us. Dinosaurs were not just stupid lizard killers waiting for someone to step on their tails. They were attentive parents, social animals with complex behaviors, and, most surprisingly, many of them were covered in feathers, similar to the down of modern chicks. The goal of this book is to dismantle the myths and look at these kings of the Mesozoic through the eyes of modern science. Paleontology over the last 30 years has undergone a revolution comparable to the transition from alchemy to chemistry. Thanks to new technologies, from computed tomography to molecular protein analysis, we have learned more about dinosaurs in the last few decades than in the previous 200 years of research combined. We will begin our journey in deep time, in a world where there was no grass, no flowers, and the air was so saturated with oxygen that it would make us dizzy. We will understand why it was the dinosaurs, and not their competitors, the mammal-like reptiles or crocodilians, that were able to seize power over the planet. We will dissect the anatomical miracles that allowed Barosaurus, weighing as much as several elephants, not only to stand, but to run. And we will try to unravel the mystery of their sudden and dramatic end. But before we dive into the past, let us define the term. What is a dinosaur? If you ask a child, he will say, a big scary lizard. If you ask a biologist from the early 20th century, he would say, an extinct reptile crawling on sprawled legs. But both answers would be wrong. First, not all dinosaurs were huge. The earliest species were the size of a chicken or even a pigeon. Many of them remained small throughout their entire evolutionary history. Second, dinosaurs did not crawl. Their legs were located directly under the body, like dogs or horses, which allowed them to move quickly and efficiently. Third, and this is the most shocking, dinosaurs did not go completely extinct. A ton of feather and meat sitting on a branch outside your window singing at dawn, a sparrow, a titmouse, or a pigeon, is a dinosaur. In the eyes of cladistics, the method of classifying organisms, birds are the only surviving branch of dinosaurs. So, when you feed pigeons bread in the square, you are literally communing with dragons. Scientifically, dinosaurs are defined as the last common ancestor of Triceratops and modern birds and all of its descendants. This is a group separated from other archosaurs, which include crocodiles and pterosaurs, by specific anatomical features, holes in the skull, the structure of the pelvis, and the ankle joint. So, welcome to the Mesozoic era, the era of middle life, an era that lasted 186 million years. This time is so vast that the human mind struggles to grasp it. To visualize this, imagine that the entire history of the Earth is 24 hours. Humanity would appear only in the last few seconds before midnight. Dinosaurs would rule for almost an entire hour, from 10:40 p.m. to 11:50 p.m. Their time was long, their empire was vast, and their story is a drama of incredible scale. To understand the triumph of the dinosaurs, we must first look absolute horror in the face. We must look at a world that ceased to exist, a world that almost killed life on Earth long before the first dinosaur appeared. We travel back to the Permian period, about 300 to 252 million years ago. The Earth then looked completely different. All the continents were stuck together in one supercontinent, Pangaea. It was a giant letter C surrounded by a single world ocean, which geologists call Panthalassa. Inside the continent, the climate was harsh. Vast deserts, extreme temperature fluctuations, monotonous forests of ancient ferns and horsetails that looked like giant asparagus. The masters of this world were not dinosaurs, nor even the ancestors of mammals. They were the therapsids, or mammal-like reptiles. Externally, they looked like a cross between a lizard and a hippopotamus, although they had no relation to lizards. Among them were the carnivorous Gorgonopsians, with saber-fanged teeth, foreshadowing the Smilodon, and massive herbivorous Diadectes. They were close to us, the mammals. They likely had primitive fur, and they could probably regulate their body temperature better than their contemporaries. It seemed that it was their destiny to rule the planet. But 252 million years ago, the irreversible happened, an event known as the Great Permian Extinction, or the Great Dying. This was the most terrible catastrophe in the history of life on Earth. It claimed the lives of about 90 to 96% of all marine species and about 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. Imagine a world where 9 out of every 10 creatures die. The causes of this catastrophe are still debated, but most scientists agree that the planet itself was to blame. In modern-day Siberia, a colossal eruption of volcanic rocks occurred, the Siberian Traps. For thousands of years, thousands of volcanoes erupted, covering an area the size of Europe with layers of basalt kilometers thick. The volcanic activity released colossal amounts of carbon dioxide and, even worse, methane. This caused a greenhouse effect of global scale. Temperatures rose by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. Oxygen in the oceans disappeared, and the waters became dead and sulfuric. Ecosystems collapsed like a house of cards. The Permian world, the world of therapsids, burned in hellish fire and suffocated in its own waste. But death is always the beginning of something new. When the volcanoes subsided and the climate began to stabilize, although it became much hotter and drier, the Earth was a desert waiting to be repopulated. This was the time of the Triassic period. The Triassic is an era of recovery. It is a world of sluggish survival, where life slowly but surely returned to normal. And in this empty world, the archosaurs, ruling reptiles, take the stage. Archosaurs were the ancestors of modern crocodiles, dinosaurs, and pterosaurs, flying reptiles. In the early Triassic, they were not large. They were small, nimble creatures resembling cats or weasels, but with scaly skin and long tails. But they had one fatal advantage over the surviving therapsids. This advantage lay in the structure of their legs and lungs. In therapsids, the ancestors of mammals, the legs were often located on the sides of the body, like modern lizards. This made their movement less efficient and required more energy. Archosaurs, however, evolved to hold their legs straight under the body. This allowed them not just to crawl, but to run, turn and maneuver with incredible speed and endurance. Moreover, they developed a unique lung system with air sacs, like modern birds. This allowed them to absorb oxygen much more efficiently, especially in the thin or superheated air of the Triassic. An arms race began. The empty ecological niches demanded filling. Archosaurs began to evolve with frightening speed. Crocodilomorphs appeared, the first terrifying predators, resembling crocodiles but running on two legs, like Postosuchus. Phytosaurs appeared, living clones of modern crocodiles that took their place in the rivers, though they were not relatives. And where were the dinosaurs in this chaos? The very first dinosaurs were unimpressive. They appeared about 233 to 240 million years ago in the middle of the Triassic period, Ladinian or Carnian stages. The oldest candidate for the title of first dinosaur is Neosaurus parringtoni, found in Tanzania. It was a small, bipedal animal, perhaps the size of a large dog, but lighter and more agile. For millions of years, dinosaurs remained in the shadow of their larger, more aggressive relatives, the Rauisuchians and Phytosaurs. They were the vermin of the Triassic, small insectivores or scavengers darting between the feet of giant archosaurs. They were marginal players in a world dominated by other monsters. But the Triassic had one last card to play. About 201 million years ago, at the boundary between the Triassic and Jurassic periods, another extinction event occurred, the Triassic-Jurassic extinction. It wasn't as catastrophic as the Permian, but it was precise. It wiped out the large crurotarsans, the pseudosuchian archosaurs, the competitors of the dinosaurs. The door was kicked open. The heavyweights of the Triassic were gone. The vacancies at the top of the food chain were wide open, and the dinosaurs, with their upright gait, their efficient lungs, and their high metabolic rates, were perfectly positioned to step through. They did not just survive, they exploded in diversity. Within a few million years, they evolved into the largest land animals the world had ever seen, the sauropods, and the most ferocious predators, the early theropods. The age of reptiles had truly begun. This transition from the shadows to the throne is one of the most dramatic stories in evolutionary history. It wasn't inevitable. If the dice of evolution had rolled differently during the Triassic extinctions, today the Earth might be ruled by intelligent, warm-blooded crocodiles, and mammals would still be hiding in the burrows. But fate, or geology, chose the dinosaurs. In the next chapter, we will look under the hood of these biological machines. How did a group of animals manage to grow so big? Were they cold-blooded like lizards, or warm-blooded like us? The answers lie in their bones, and they challenge everything we thought we knew about reptiles. Dinosaurs did not conquer the world just by being lucky. To dominate the planet for 160 million years, they needed to be biological machines far superior to anything that had come before. They were not just scaled-up lizards, they were a complete redesign of the vertebrate body plan. To understand how they ruled, we need to look at their engineering. We need to look at their legs, their lungs, and their blood. The upright revolution. If you look at a lizard or a crocodile running, you see a side-to-side motion. Their legs sprout out from the sides of their bodies, and to move fast, they have to bend their spine into an S shape. It's inefficient. Much of the energy goes into wobbling rather than moving forward. Now picture a dog, a horse, or a human. Our legs are directly under our bodies. This is called a parasagittal gait. It allows us to breathe while we run. A lizard cannot breathe and run at the same time because the bending of its spine compresses its lungs one side and then the other. Dinosaurs were the first group of large animals to fully commit to this upright posture. They evolved a distinct hip socket, the acetabulum, that was a hole, not a groove, allowing the femur to fit snugly underneath. This changed everything. It turned their locomotion into a highly energy-efficient piston-like motion. A dinosaur could run farther and faster than a synapsid or a crocodilian of the same size. In a world where energy is currency, dinosaurs were the billionaires. The warm-blooded paradox. For decades, paleontologists fought a bitter war over the metabolism of dinosaurs. Were they cold-blooded, ectothermic, like modern reptiles, relying on the sun to warm up? Or were they warm-blooded, endothermic, like mammals and birds, generating their own internal heat? The answer, as it often is in biology, is complicated. They weren't one or the other. They were something in between. If dinosaurs were strictly cold-blooded, a Tyrannosaurus rex would have taken hours to warm up in the morning before it could hunt effectively. It would have been sluggish and slow. But we know from their bones and their ecological dominance that they were active predators. However, if they were strictly warm-blooded like mammals, a huge sauropod would have cooked itself from the inside out. Generating enough heat to power a 50-ton body would require an impossible amount of food. Current science points to a condition called mesothermy. Dinosaurs likely had an internal metabolic rate higher than crocodiles, but lower than modern mammals. They could regulate their body temperature to some degree, but larger dinosaurs also utilized gigantothermy. Once you reach a certain size, you lose heat so slowly that you stay warm simply by existing, much like a large cup of coffee stays hot longer than a small one. This Goldilocks metabolism allowed them to be active without needing to eat constantly. It was the perfect balance for a world of giant animals. Avian lungs and air sacs. Perhaps the most distinct dinosaur feature, and one that is still with us today in birds, is their respiratory system. Mammals breathe in and out. Our lungs are like balloons that inflate and deflate. When we exhale, we never get all the air out. There is always stale air left inside. Dinosaurs evolved a different system, likely inherited from their earliest archosaur ancestors. They had flow-through lungs, supported by a system of air sacs throughout their bodies, and even hollowing out their bones. Imagine a bellows system. Air flows into the rear air sacs, then moves into the lungs where oxygen exchange happens, and then flows out into the front air sacs before being exhaled. It is a one-way street. Incredibly efficient oxygen extraction. This is why birds can fly at altitudes that would kill a human, and this is why sauropods, with their incredibly long necks, managed to pump oxygen all the way to their brains without passing out. This supercharged respiratory system was the jet engine that powered the dinosaur empire. Growth rates and parental care. Old textbooks used to depict dinosaurs as slow, dim-witted creatures that took a century to reach full size. We now know this was false. By studying the microscopic structure of fossilized bones, paleohistology, scientists can see growth rings, similar to trees. Dinosaurs grew fast. A Maiasaura hatchling could reach the size of a cow in just 1 year. This rapid growth was likely a survival strategy. The smaller you are, the more things want to eat you. Growing up quickly was the best way to move out of the snack size category. Furthermore, the image of the abandoned dinosaur egg is dead. In the last few decades, we have found numerous nesting grounds, most famously in Mongolia and Argentina, showing that dinosaurs cared for their young. Nests are arranged in careful patterns, and adults have been found fossilized, sitting on top of clutches of eggs, brooding them like birds. This combination of rapid growth and parental care gave dinosaurs a demographic advantage. They could repopulate ecosystems quickly after disasters, ensuring their reign continued through the ages. With their superior anatomy and high metabolisms, dinosaurs were ready for the big time. As the Triassic period closed and the Jurassic period began, roughly 201 million years ago, the world changed, and the dinosaurs exploded into diversity. This is the era most familiar to us from pop culture, the Jurassic. It was a time of warmth, humidity, and abundance. During the Jurassic, the supercontinent Pangaea began to rip apart. Tectonic plates shifted, creating vast rift valleys that would eventually become new oceans. This breakup had a profound effect on evolution. As continents drifted away from one another, populations of animals were isolated. They began to evolve separately, adapting to their new local environments. This process, called allopatric speciation, drove a massive increase in biodiversity. The one world, one fauna system of the Triassic was replaced by a patchwork of distinct dinosaur kingdoms. The climate became wetter. Deserts shrank, and vast forests of conifers, ginkgos, and cycads covered the land. This explosion of plant life provided the fuel for the evolution of the largest animals to ever walk the earth. If there is one symbol of the Jurassic, it is the sauropod: Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, Apatosaurus, and the later Titanosaurs. These were the true giants, some reaching lengths of over 30 meters, 100 feet, and weights of 70 tons. To understand a sauropod, you have to stop thinking of it as a giant elephant. An elephant is heavy and bulky. A sauropod was light for its size. Their bones were filled with air sacs, making them strong but lightweight. Their necks were made of lightweight vertebrae held up by tendons and muscles, requiring minimal energy to keep aloft. They were essentially living cranes, able to strip foliage from the tallest trees without moving their massive bodies, saving energy. But how did they eat enough to stay alive? A 50-ton animal needs a lot of calories. The secret was a lack of chewing. Sauropods did not chew their food. They had simple peg-like teeth that stripped branches. They swallowed the vegetation whole and let it ferment in their massive guts, using bacteria to break down the tough plant matter. They were essentially biological fermentation tanks on legs. One of the most famous Jurassic sauropods is Diplodocus. Found in the Morrison Formation of North America, it was a long, low-slung animal with a tail that could crack like a whip, likely used for communication or defense against predators. Another giant, Brachiosaurus, had a different posture. Its front legs were longer than its back legs, giving it a giraffe-like stance. It specialized in browsing the very highest canopy levels, accessing food that no other animal could reach. The predators of the Jurassic. Where there are herbivores, there are predators. The Jurassic was ruled by a different lineage of theropods than the famous Tyrannosaurus. The top dogs of the Jurassic were the carnosaurs, specifically the Allosauroids. While smaller than T-Rex, weighing about 2 to 3 tons compared to the T-Rex's 8+ tons, Allosaurus was a perfectly designed killing machine. It had long, serrated teeth designed like steak knives to slice through flesh rather than crush bone. Recent studies suggest Allosaurus hunted differently than later predators. Its skull was somewhat kitted like a hatchet. It may have attacked by opening its jaws incredibly wide and slamming its upper teeth down onto its prey like a guillotine, causing massive blood loss. It likely hunted in packs or loose groups, harassing large sauropods until one of them fell. But the Jurassic skies were not empty. This was the golden age of the pterosaurs. While not dinosaurs, these flying reptiles were close relatives. In the Jurassic, they evolved into the famous Rhamphorhynchus with its long tail, and the early ancestors of the gigantic Cretaceous pterosaurs, like Pteranodon. While dinosaurs ruled the land, the oceans were the domain of other reptiles. Ichthyosaurs, dolphin-like reptiles, and plesiosaurs, long-necked swimmers, patrolled the seas. The apex predator of the Jurassic seas was Liopleurodon, a massive pliosaur with a bite force capable of crushing a car. However, one marine reptile often confused with a dinosaur deserves mention: Plesiosaurus. With its flippers, long neck, and small head, it has become a staple of monster mythology. But in reality, it was a slow, graceful predator of fish and squid. The Jurassic also gave us one of the most important fossils in history. In the late Jurassic limestone of Germany, about 150 million years ago, lived Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx is the missing link that proved Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. It had teeth, a long bony tail, and claws on its wings, features of dinosaurs. But it also had feathers, a wishbone, and wings, features of birds. Its discovery proved that birds are living dinosaurs. In the Jurassic forests, small theropods, similar to Anchiornis or Xiaotingia, began to climb trees and glide. Feathers, which likely evolved first for warmth or display, were co-opted for flight. The sky was the next frontier, and the dinosaurs were about to conquer it. As the Jurassic period drew to a close, the dinosaurs were at the peak of their success. They had conquered the land, driven their competitors to extinction, and even begun to take to the air. But the world was changing again. The continents were drifting further apart, and new plants were evolving that would change the menu forever. The Cretaceous was coming, and with it, the final, most glorious act of the dinosaur drama. We are now at approximately 4,500 words. Shall I proceed to Chapter 4 and the Cretaceous period? As the Jurassic period faded away, the world entered the Cretaceous. This was the final act of the Mesozoic era, spanning from 145 to 66 million years ago. It was the longest of the three periods, and it saw the dinosaurs reach their absolute peak of diversity and strangeness. If the Jurassic was the era of the giants, the Cretaceous was the era of the specialists. The continents were drifting apart, creating isolated islands and distinct climates. The geography of the world was beginning to look familiar, though the map was scrambled. South America, Africa, India, and Australia were all separating, while the Atlantic Ocean was widening. But the biggest change wasn't happening on the ground, it was happening in the dirt. In the early Cretaceous, a new type of plant appeared. It was small, unassuming, and fragile. It was the flowering plant, or angiosperm. Before this, the world was green with gymnosperms, conifers, cycads, and ginkgos. These were tough, slow-growing, and often low in nutrition. But flowering plants evolved a new strategy. They partnered with animals. They offered sugary nectar and nutritious fruits to insects, and later to dinosaurs, in exchange for pollination and seed dispersal. This changed everything. The plant world exploded into color. Grasses appeared, though they wouldn't dominate until after the dinosaurs died. Fast-growing, energy-rich plants spread across the plains. The herbivorous dinosaurs had to adapt quickly to this new menu. This led to the evolution of the most sophisticated chewing machines in Earth's history. The duck-billed dinosaurs, hadrosaurs. To process the tough new vegetation, the hadrosaurs evolved. They are often called duck-billed dinosaurs because of their flat, wide beaks. But the beak was just the entrance to a factory. Inside their jaws, hadrosaurs had batteries of hundreds of teeth. They were stacked in rows, like a conveyor belt. As a tooth wore down, a new one from behind pushed forward to replace it. A single Edmontosaurus might have gone through 1,000 teeth in its lifetime. They could grind up even the toughest, fibrous plants with efficiency that rivaled modern cows. But it wasn't just their mouths that made them special. It was their heads. Many hadrosaurs, like Corythosaurus or Parasaurolophus, possessed elaborate crests on top of their skulls. These were made of hollow bone, connected to the nasal passages. Scientists believe these crests were resonating chambers. They acted like brass instruments. A Parasaurolophus could blast a low-frequency sound that could travel for miles. These were likely used for communication, calling for mates, warning of predators, or keeping the herd together in dense Cretaceous forests. The Jurassic was silent compared to the noisy, trumpeting world of the Cretaceous. While the hadrosaurs were the grazers, the ceratopsians were the tank-like browsers of the time. The most famous is Triceratops. With its 3 horns and massive neck frill, it looks like a rhinoceros on steroids. But the evolution of ceratopsians is fascinating. They started small, like Psittacosaurus, a parrot-beaked runner with no horns. Over millions of years they got bigger, their beaks got wider, and the frills became larger and more elaborate. Some, like Styracosaurus, had spikes radiating from their frills like a sunburst. Others, like Centrosaurus, had hooks. The function of the frill is debated. Certainly it offered protection for the neck and attachment points for massive jaw muscles. But many species also had holes in the bone of the frill covered in skin, which might have been brightly colored for display. These were social animals, living in herds, and visual signaling was crucial. Another strange group were the pachycephalosaurs, or thick-headed lizards. Pachycephalosaurus had a dome of bone atop its skull that was up to 10 inches, 25 centimeters, thick. For a long time, scientists thought they rammed heads like rams. Recent analysis suggests they might have flanked each other, swinging their heavy skulls sideways to strike the body, avoiding brain damage. They were the brawlers of the Cretaceous. While the herbivores were busy evolving crests and horns, the predators were getting scarier. In North America, the allosaurs of the Jurassic were replaced by the tyrannosaurids. The most famous of them all is Tyrannosaurus rex. T-Rex appeared late in the Cretaceous, about 68 million years ago. It was not just a big dinosaur. It was a hyper-carnivore engineered for destruction. It stood 12 to 13 feet tall at the hips and reached lengths of 40 feet. Its skull was massive, 5 feet long, lined with teeth the size of bananas. But unlike the steak knife teeth of Allosaurus, T-Rex teeth were rounded and spiked like railroad spikes. They were designed to crush bone. T-Rex didn't just eat meat, it ate the whole animal. We used to think T-Rex was a slow scavenger. We now know better. Studies of its leg bones and muscle attachments show it could run fast, perhaps 15 to 20 miles per hour, 25 to 32 kilometers per hour. It had binocular vision. Its eyes faced forward, giving it depth perception better than a modern hawk. It could see you, and it could catch you. But T-Rex wasn't the only giant predator. In South America, which was an island continent at the time, a different lineage ruled, the Carcharodontosaurids. Giganotosaurus rivaled T-Rex in size, but had a different build, narrower, with shark-like teeth adapted for slicing. It hunted the massive Argentinosaurus, a sauropod so large it made the Brachiosaurus look small. One of the biggest discoveries of the last 30 years is the confirmation that most, if not all, theropod dinosaurs had feathers. The Jurassic Archaeopteryx was just the start. In the Cretaceous, particularly in Liaoning province, China. We have found fossils of dinosaurs that are essentially indistinguishable from birds, except for teeth and tails. Dromaeosaurus and Velociraptor, made famous by Jurassic Park, were not scaly. They were covered in plumage. They had wings on their arms and long feathers on their tails for balance. They were highly intelligent, pack-hunting predators. While the movie version was large, the real Velociraptor was about the size of a turkey, but no less deadly. The raptors used their famous sickle claw not to slash, but to grip and climb, or to pin down prey while they ate it alive. We even found dinosaurs that looked like the demon from the movie Alien. Eutyrannus, a cousin of T-Rex, was 30 feet long and covered in shaggy, hair-like feathers. It proves that even the giants were fluffy. The Cretaceous was a vibrant, loud, colorful, and feathery world. It was the peak of dinosaur evolution. They dominated every continent, every niche, and every food chain. They seemed unstoppable. Before we discuss their end, we must pause to appreciate a group that we often exclude from the dinosaur conversation: the birds. By the Cretaceous, birds had diversified significantly. There were two main groups: the Enantiornithes, opposite birds, and the Ornitherae, which includes modern birds. The Enantiornithes were the most successful birds of the Cretaceous. They looked very similar to modern birds. They could fly well, had beaks, and perched in trees. But they still kept some dinosaur features, like teeth in their beaks and claws on their wings. They filled the forests, eating insects, fish, and seeds. Alongside them were the ancestors of modern birds. They were generally smaller and less diverse at the time, hiding in the undergrowth or wading in the shallows. Why is this distinction important? Because when the catastrophe came, the Enantiornithes died out completely. Every single one of them. But the ancestors of modern birds survived. The difference? It likely came down to diet and lifestyle. Many Enantiornithes were arboreal, living in trees. If the forests collapsed, they starved. The ancestors of modern birds were often ground dwellers, or shore birds that could eat seeds, detritus, or whatever was left over. Being a generalist eater saved their lineage. So, when we look at a pigeon today, we aren't just looking at a descendant of a dinosaur. We are looking at a dinosaur that survived the apocalypse that killed the giants. The Cretaceous was a golden age, but it was living on borrowed time. Deep beneath the crust of the Earth, tectonic forces were building up a tension that would snap with violence beyond comprehension. And in space, a rock was hurtling toward Earth. 66 million years ago, an asteroid the size of Mount Everest, traveling at roughly 45,000 miles per hour, slammed into the Earth. It hit the Yucatan Peninsula in modern-day Mexico. The energy released was equivalent to billions of atomic bombs. The impact dug a crater 110 miles wide and 12 miles deep. In the blink of an eye, trillions of tons of rock were vaporized and launched into space. For those dinosaurs on the other side of the planet, the initial impact might not have been fatal. They might have seen a flash brighter than the sun. But the horror was just beginning. An hour later, the vaporized rock began to rain back down. As the debris re-entered the atmosphere, it turned into shooting stars of fire. The sky turned into a broiler. The heat was so intense that it likely ignited global wildfires. Anything exposed above ground or in the forests burned. But the fire was just the prelude. The impact threw so much dust and sulfur into the atmosphere that it blocked the sun. For months, perhaps years, the Earth was shrouded in freezing darkness. Photosynthesis stopped. The plants died. Without plants, the plant eaters starved. Without plant eaters, the predators starved. The food web collapsed. The elegant, complex ecosystems of the Cretaceous, built over 180 million years of evolution, unraveled in a matter of years. It wasn't just the dinosaurs. The ammonites, the marine reptiles, the pterosaurs, they all vanished. Anything larger than a cat and anything that relied on a constant supply of fresh food was doomed. The geological record shows this as a thin line of clay called the KPG boundary. Below the line, fossils are abundant. Above it, silence. In the darkness, the small survivors scrambled. The mammals, which had been hiding in the shadows for millions of years, burrowed underground and ate roots and insects. And the birds, the small, ground-dwelling ancestors of the ducks, chickens, and ostriches for seeds in the ash. They survived because they were small, because they didn't need much food, and because they were adaptable. They were the lucky few. The giants were gone. The Tyrannosaurus, the Triceratops, the Titanosaurus, relegated to bone and rock. The extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs is a tragedy, but it is also a beginning. With the giants gone, mammals were free to diversify. They grew bigger, took over the land, and eventually, one branch of mammals evolved an opposable thumb and a big brain. That branch became us. We are the beneficiaries of the asteroid. We live in the age of mammals. But let's not forget who built the stage we stand on. The dinosaurs ruled this planet for over 160 million years. They conquered the land, the sea, and the air. They evolved feathers, flight, and social behaviors we are only now beginning to understand. And in a way, they never really left. Look out your window. Watch a crow solve a puzzle. Watch a hawk dive. Listen to a sparrow sing. You are watching dinosaurs. The Tyrannosaurus rex is dead, but its dynasty continues. They are still the most successful group of land vertebrates on the planet. There are roughly 10,000 species of birds today, twice the number of mammal species. So, the next time you see a chicken nugget, remember, you are eating the descendant of the king of the lizards. And the next time you see a starling, remember, you are looking at a survivor of the apocalypse. The story of the dinosaurs is not a story of failure. It is a story of success beyond measure, a story of adaptation and endurance, and a story that is still being written today.